Alright guys, we're going to get some more practice here with frowny face factoring. So let's look at number 2. I have 30m squared minus 80m minus 30. The first thing I want to do, according to our blue sheet, is take out the greatest common factor. So if I look here, I have 30, 80, and 30. The GCF is 10. And then I can divide each term by 10 to see what I have left. So 30m squared divided by 10 is 3m squared. Negative 80 divided by 10 is negative 8m, and negative 30 divided by 10 is negative 3. So when I take out the GCF, I'm left with 3m squared, or 10 times the quantity of 3m squared minus 8m minus 3. Now on the inside of these brackets, I look at what I have left, 3m squared minus 8m minus 3. And I see that it has 3 terms, and my a value is 3, so I can frowny face factor by multiplying my 3 times negative 3 to get negative 9. Now, I need to find the factors of negative 9 that add together to be negative 8. So, I want negative 9 and positive 1, and I can rewrite my expression here. I'll bring down my 10, and I'll rewrite this dude right here, 3m squared. The negative term goes first, so minus 9m plus 1m. Bring down my minus 3, and I can close my brackets. Now I need to break them into parentheses, break them into binomials. So 3m squared minus 9m, and m plus 3 with an addition symbol in between. Bring down my 10 again and open it up. Now let's see what my GCF is here. 3m squared minus 9m. 3 and 9 both have a 3 in common. M squared and m both have an m in common, and I can see what I have left. So 3m squared divided by 3m leaves me with m. 9m divided by 3m leaves me with 3. And then in my second binomial here, m minus 3, there isn't a GCF, which just means I'm going to take out a 1, and I'm left with that m minus 3. Now finally, I can bring down my GCF. The binomials that I have in common are m minus 3, and I'm left with 3m plus 1. So 30m squared minus 80m minus 30 factors into 10 times the quantity of m minus 3 times the quantity of 3m plus 1. We're going to skip number 3 and let's go to number 4. So again, 10x squared plus 21x plus 10, or minus 10. The first thing I want to do is look for greatest common factor. So the GCF between a 10, a 21, and a 10, well, there isn't one, so I can't take anything out. I have 3 terms, and my a value is 10, so I want to multiply my a value times my c value, which gives me negative 100, and I want to find the factors that multiply together to be negative 100 and add together to be positive 21. So, if you need to, take a second, pause the video, find those factors that multiply together to be negative 100 and add together to be 21. Hopefully you got negative 4 and positive 25. So now I can rewrite my expression. 10x squared minus 4x plus 25x minus 10. Then we can group our 2 binomials and take out the greatest common factor. 10 and 4 both have a 2 in common. X squared and x, I can take out an x. Then 10x squared divided by 2x leaves me with 5x. And 4x divided by 2x leaves me with 2. Now my second binomial over here, 25x minus 10, 25 and 10 both have a 5 in common. And I can see what's left. 25x minus 5, or divided by 5 gives me 5x, and negative 10 divided by 5 is negative 2. So my 2 binomials are the same. 5x minus 2, that can come out first. And whatever I have left goes second. That's 2x plus 5. Next, we're going to go down to number 6. I have 9n squared minus 6n minus 15 equals 0. So here, the first thing I need to check for is a greatest common factor. So 9, 6, and 15 all have a 3 in common. And let's see what I have left after I take that out. 9 divided by 3 is 3n squared. 6 divided by 3 is negative 2n, and 15 divided by 3 is negative 5. And so I'm left with 3 times the quantity of 3n squared minus 2n minus 5 equals 0. Now inside of my brackets here, I have 3 terms with an a value of 3, so I can multiply 3 times negative 5 to get negative 15. And I can rewrite that expression with 2 factors that multiply together to be negative 15 and add together to be negative 2. Now, the 2 numbers that multiply to be negative 15 and add together to be negative 2 are negative 5 and positive 3. So I can bring down my 3, and I'm going to say 3n squared minus 5n. Goodness, my pen's not working. Let me try this again. 3n squared minus 5n plus 3n minus 5. Close your bracket, set it equal to 0. Then you can group your binomials and take out the greatest common factor. So bring down my 3. The GCF between 3n squared and negative 5n is just an n, and I'll be left with 3n squared divided by n is 3n. 5n divided by n is 5. And then on my second binomial here, there is no GCF, so I can take out a 1 and be left with 3n minus 5. Close my bracket, set it equal to 0. Now let's see what I have when I'm all done. I bring down my 3. My binomials that are the same are the 3n minus 5. And whatever I'm left with is that n plus 1. And of course I set it all equal to 0. Now remember, to solve we need to use the zero product property where I take each term and I set it equal to 0. So I can take 3 and set it equal to 0. I can take 3n minus 5 and set it equal to 0. And I can take n plus 1 and set it equal to 0. Now my first equation here, 3 equals 0, doesn't have a variable, so it really gives us nothing. It's not true, it's not an answer. My second equation here, I can add 5 to each side, 3n equals 5, and divide each side by 3 to get 5/3. And then on my third equation here, I can subtract 1 from each side, and n equals negative 1. So my two solutions here are 5 over 3 and negative 1. All right, on number 8, if you'll notice, I have 8x squared plus 5x equals 3 plus 7x. I'm not set equal to 0 over here. I need to subtract these two terms over to set them equal to 0. So I'm going to do it one term at a time. First, I'm going to start by subtracting 7x over, and I'll get negative 2x, and that's equal to 3. Then I can subtract 3 over, 8x squared minus 2x minus 3, and set that equal to 0. Now, what I'd like you to do is pause the video and solve this one on your own. So, when you multiply 8 times negative 3, you get negative 24. And the factors of negative 24 that add together to be negative 2 are negative 6 and 4. So I can rewrite it as 8x squared minus 6x plus 4x minus 3 equals 0. Then I can take out the greatest common factor in each of these binomials. So 2x comes out of my first binomial, and 1 comes out of my second binomial. So I'm left with the quantity of 4x minus 3 times the quantity of 2x plus 1 equals 0. Then we take each binomial and set it equal to 0 and solve, and you should get your two results to be 3 over 4 and negative 1/2. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is Newton's law. Quadratic equations are used to solve projectile motion. So like if you throw a ball up in the air, it goes up and then it comes back down. If you launch a rocket, it goes up and then comes back down. If you jump off of something, it goes up and then it comes back down. Projectile motions, also called parabolas, are solved using quadratic equations. Now, the height of the projectile is given by this equation right here. And then it says where h is the height in feet. This is the ending height. T represents time, and that has to be in seconds. V is the initial upward velocity in feet per second, which is kind of like another way of saying its speed. And h sub 0 is its initial height, which we know is another word for its starting height. So on number 9 it says, suppose a cheetah pouncing on an antelope leaps with an initial upward velocity of 19 feet per second. how long is the cheetah in the air if it lands on the antelope's hindquarter 3 feet from the ground? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a picture over here. That's really going to help us get a visual for what's happening in this problem. Now it says we have a cheetah that's going to be pouncing on an antelope. Now I don't know about you guys, but I'm not very artistic, so my cheetah is going to look like that. That is my cheetah. If you want to make it more artistic, you do so, but you don't have to. And then over here, I have an antelope grazing on the grass, just minding his own business, living his life. Now the cheetah pounces from the ground and leaps into the air and lands on the antelope's hindquarter. So this is the path that my cheetah is taking. We want to figure out how long he was in the air and how long it took him to land on the antelope's hindquarter. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to substitute information into this equation to solve. So I'm going to start by writing this equation down. H equals negative 16 t squared plus v times t plus h sub 0. Now, it says how long is the cheetah in the air, so we're solving for t. T represents time. Let's see what I can substitute in for my other variables. So, suppose a cheetah pouncing on an antelope leaps with an initial upward velocity of 19 feet per second. So that is very direct on what it goes in for. It goes in for initial upward velocity. Now if I look through this again, it says v represents the initial upward velocity, so I can put in that 19 for v. Now this term right here, I don't need to substitute anything in for. It already gave me that negative 16, which represents gravity in feet, or feet per second squared, and t is what we're solving for. So now that means all I have left to solve for is the height where he ends and the height where he begins. Now it says how long is the cheetah in the air if it lands on the antelope's hindquarter 3 feet from the ground. So when he lands on the antelope's hindquarter right here, he is 3 feet off the ground. Now that 3 is going to represent a height. I just have to figure out if that's where he ended or if that's where he started. So 3 feet he ended on, because that's where our picture ends, so that's going to go in here for h. Now I just have to figure out what goes in for his starting height. Where did the cheetah start before he leaped into the air? And the answer to that question is the cheetah started on the ground. So the height when he's on the ground is 0. Now all I have to do is solve this equation. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 3 from each side. Then I look for a GCF, and 3 does not go into 19, so there's no GCF. So I have 3 terms with an a value of negative 16, so I'm going to use the frowny face factoring here. So negative 16 times negative 3 leaves me with a positive 48, and I want the factors of 48 that add together to be 19. So pause the video, find me the factors of 48 that add together to be 19. Hopefully you got those factors to be 3 and 16. So now I'm going to rewrite my equation here. So 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 3t plus 16t minus 3. Now I break it into my two binomials. Now remember, at this point we want to take out the greatest common factor. So I'm going to bring down my 0 equals. And if I look at my first binomial, 16 and 3 don't have anything in common. T squared and t, I can take out a t. But remember, my first term always has to be positive. So since this guy's negative, I'm going to take out a negative t. Now let's see what I have left. When I have a negative 16 t squared divided by negative t, the negatives cancel out, 16 comes along for the ride, and I still have a t left. Then positive 3t divided by negative t leaves me with a negative 3. In my second binomial here, 16t minus 3, I don't have a GCF, so I'm going to take out a plus 1, and I'm going to be left with 16t minus 3. Now, let's see what that factors into. So 0 equals The 16t minus 3 is in common, right here and here. Then I have a negative t plus 1. Now I can take each binomial and set it equal to 0. So 16t plus 3, or no, sorry, 16t minus 3. I was having a hard time reading my own handwriting. 16t minus 3 equals 0. And negative t plus 1 equals 0. So on my first equation here, I can add 3 to each side and divide by 16, and t equals 3 over 16. On my second guy here, I can subtract 1 and divide by negative 1, and I get t equals 1. So I got two answers here, 3/16 of a second and 1 second. But the question says how long is the cheetah in the air if it lands on the antelope's hindquarter? There are two answers here, and let's talk about why that is. The antelope's hindquarter is 3 feet from the ground. So if I were to draw a horizontal line at 3 feet, you'll notice that the cheetah actually hits 3 feet off the ground 2 times, once on his way up and once on his way back down. So we have to figure out which of these answers is when he lands on the antelope's hindquarter and which of them is when he's on his way up. To do this, we just have to put them in numerical order. 3/16 of a second happens before 1 second. So since the cheetah hit 3 feet on his way up before he hit it on his way down, this one's going to be 3/16 of a second, and this one's going to be 1 second. That means the answer to my question is it took him 1 second to land on the antelope. Let's try it again for number 10. A person throws a ball upward from a 506-foot tall building. The ball's height in feet after t seconds is given by this equation here. The ball lands on a balcony that is 218 feet above the ground. How many seconds was in the air? So this is a pretty complex picture. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to draw the building on this side of the graph, and then we're going to draw a balcony that's coming off of it. So the person threw the ball from the top of the building, and it landed on the balcony. We have to figure out how long it took. Now, the equation they gave me is negative 16t squared plus 48t plus 506. So it looks like they've given me all the information I need, but we have to figure out what goes in here for the h. Now remember, the h represents its ending height, and this ball landed or ended on the balcony. Now it says the ball lands on a balcony that's 218 feet above the ground. So I need to say my ending height is 218, and that can go in here for h. Now to solve, I have to set it equal to 0. So if I subtract 218 over, I'll get negative 16t squared plus 48t. And then in my calculator, I can take 506 minus 218, and I'm going to get 288 feet off of the ground. Now, I need to factor. So I want to see if there's a GCF first. And to do that, I'm going to see if the smallest number can go into either of these. And if it can't, then we'll look at the factors. But if it can, that'll be some pretty easy work. So I'm going to start by seeing if 48 divided by 16 is a nice number. And it totally is. Then I'm going to see if 288 divided by 16 is a nice number. And it also is. So that means I have a greatest common factor here of 16. But there's one more thing that I want to point out. We don't like it when our first term is negative. So to make this easier, let's factor out a negative 16, and then my first term will become positive. Now let's see what I have left. Negative 16 t squared divided by negative 16 just leaves me with t squared. 48t divided by negative 16 leaves me with negative 3t. And 288 divided by negative 16 gives me a negative 18. Now here's what's awesome. What I'm left with inside of my brackets has an a value of 1. So I don't have to frowny face factor. I can easy factor. So I leave my negative 16 there, and I'm going to break this up into two binomials. T goes in first, and now we just need to find the factors of negative 18 that add together to be negative 3. So those two factors are positive 3 and negative 6. Now we just take each term and set it equal to 0. So negative 16 equals 0, t plus 3 equals 0, and t minus 6 equals 0. Now this dude, not an equation. There's no variable. This dude gives me a result of negative 3, and this dude gives me a result of positive 6. So we have to see which answer makes sense. It says how many seconds was the ball in the air. Our options are either negative 3 seconds or positive 6 seconds. This one's a no-brainer because we can't have negative time. So the ball was in the air for 6 seconds.